I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
For the victory lap, though. Whoa, whoa. They ain't never seen
it. Is the fifth quarter here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Your start to the week in college football. I am Mike Waddell. That is the coach, Jim Collins. Coach, going into this 2024, I really thought, man, we were going to be in for a heck of a fall. But yet here we sit heading into the fourth week of September in college football. And lo and behold, every football subdivision squad in the state of North Carolina is already falling on some really hard times. And this past weekend particularly was pretty ugly by North Carolina football standards.
Mike, it was a tough weekend for a lot of people. The only folks that came out smelling good on this end of it were the Duke Blue Devils in a big win at Middle Tennessee State University. And again, I make the statement, and I hesitate to make this statement. It's a Group of 5 win, but yet we're going to spend our time talking about a major school in our state that lost to a Group of 5 team. So I guess any win is a big win now, is the way I have to look at it.
When you look at the way that Duke did go on the road, anytime you win a road game in college football, that's impressive. But the Blue Devils go out to Tennessee, and they get the best of Middle Tennessee State. They rolled a 4-0 under first-year head coach Manny Diaz with a 45-7 win at Middle Tennessee State. This was a statement game for the Blue Devils as they start to get their rhythm heading back to Wallace Wade for Saturday's matchup with the Tar Heels.
Their defense has been outstanding the entire year. And no matter who the opponent is, whether it's Texas and the way they've played or Tennessee and the way they've played, the Blue Devils have faced the opponents they've been up against, and they've played really, really well on defense all the way through the season. And it was a decent offensive game for the Blue Devils. 340 total yards against Middle Tennessee, 216 yards passing, 124 yards rushing. Whether that's good enough to win in the ACC or not, we're going to see down the road. But I do like the Blue Devil defense at this point.
As we move back into ACC play over the weekend, North Carolina entertaining James Madison, the Dukes and the Tar Heels at Kenan Stadium. And Jimmy, a lot of Carolina fans probably just said, oh, this is James Madison, we'll walk this one. But this JMU team has been pretty hot under Curt Cignetti. He is now the head coach at Indiana. James Madison comes in with a brand new head coach, half their team brand new, and they laid a whooping on North Carolina, and it was the same thing that we've been talking about for 2 years. North Carolina, incredibly weak up front on the offensive line, incredibly weak on the defensive line. They cannot control the lines of scrimmages, and truly, I was shocked at how James Madison manhandled North Carolina. That was not good.
Well, it was. It was a total embarrassment. There's no doubt about that, Mike. And unfortunately, in my career, I've been a part of a couple of those embarrassments, and for me to sit here and say and be critical of somebody would be extremely difficult for me to do that, being a former coach and in this position, because sometimes you just can't explain it. It just happens. And in the day and age we are in college football right now, the Power 5 teams are much closer to being Group of 5s than they are Power 5s, especially in the ACC. I think the power structure in the ACC, there's a huge divide between the top of the ACC, the middle of the ACC, and the bottom of it. But it was a very, very difficult day for the Tar Heels from an offensive, defensive, and a special teams. They lost in all 3 phases. There's no doubt about that.
Also over the weekend, tough one for North Carolina State. And Dave Doran takes the Wolfpack down the Death Valley. And just like Appalachian State found out a few weeks ago, you go into Death Valley right now, it could be a long afternoon. And just like the Mountaineers, NC State basically run out of Memorial Stadium there very early in that one. Clemson coast to the win, even though the Wolfpack did put some points up later in the game. Is there anything that Dave Doeren can take out positive from getting thumped like that in his conference opener?
Well, I think the main thing he can take out of that is he's got to find young freshman quarterback. That's a good player that they can build on and build around and grow with, because I really think he is a bright spot for them. They just need to continue to get the ball to their playmakers. And obviously Concepcion is their best playmaker, and he's not getting enough touches right now. And we can't continue to turn the ball over. We can't continue to have penalties as the Wolfpack. So they're up against some challenges now, without a doubt. But they unfortunately had the opportunity, or the misfortune to go in and play a bunch of pissed off Clemson Tigers, and the Clemson Tigers have played pissed off for a couple of weeks in a row now.
The other two teams out of North Carolina, FBS squads that were in action this weekend, both again falling. They played each other last week in Greenville. We're talking, of course, about the East Carolina Pirates and the Appalachian State Mountaineers. Sean Clark's black and gold at home last Thursday. South Alabama came in, and the Jaguars were all over again. Appalachian State slow out of the blocks and unable to catch up, because just when they were going down the field and Joey Aguilar was about to make it 21-7, he gives up a long 90-plus yard interception return later, another big exclamation point score in the first half there for South Alabama. They led at that point 28-0. App was able to score on the last play of the first half, but this one was not competitive in Boone. And that's tough right now, because the Mountaineers, for a second year in a row now, have gotten off to a mediocre start, especially with the 0-1 hole they have now with the loss to South Alabama. They're in the Sun Belt.
Well, Mike, in college football right now, it's tough enough to play and win on the road. So what I'm saying when I tell you this, you have to be able to win at home. If you can't win at home, especially with the way the crowd is in Boone right now, they're so enthusiastic and they're so into the game. You've got to be able to win home games, and to lose at home to a South Alabama team. South Alabama is a good football team, but you can't lose to those folks at home and expect to win the Sun Belt Championship.
East Carolina did battle against Liberty, but the Flames burn their boats right there in the harbor. And that's a second straight loss now for Mike Houston and the East Carolina Pirates. Not the type of trajectory you want to head into late September, early October, Jim.
You have to be able to compete within your conference if you're gonna have a successful year. It's so difficult to win the early season games when you're playing Power 5 schools. Once you get into the league, you got to be able to compete within the league and win within the league. Well, that's 2 weeks in a row that the Pirates have struggled mightily within the league. So they have to go back this week and restructure and find out where they're headed in Greenville right now.
With the coach, Jim Collins, I'm Mike Waddell, and you're tuned in right here all across the Old North State on the North Carolina Sports Network.
In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network.
This is the fifth quarter, talking college football in North Carolina. Mike Waddell and Jim Collins here on the North Carolina Sports Network. And this segment is brought to you by our partners from Stifel. For all of your investment and financial counsel, check out the folks at Stifel, proud partners right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Okay, Jim, let's talk about North Carolina State. Over the weekend, they go down to Death Valley and they take home their second loss of the season. NC State right now 0-2 against teams wearing orange, so I guess they don't want to see Syracuse or anybody else wearing that hue from the rainbow coming out. But this is just not the type of start to the 2024 campaign that a lot of us were expecting to see from Dave Doran and the Wolfpack.
Not anywhere close, Mike. It's the confusing thing to me is that the Wolfpack at this point in time have self. Let's start over with that. The confusing thing to me with the Wolfpack right now is that they have not helped themselves by any stretch of the imagination with turnovers, with penalties. They've just self-imploded at this point in time. The other thing that's extremely confusing to me is Tony Gibson and that defensive staff have done an outstanding job there for years. Well, they're struggling to play defense right now. They've given up 50 some points to two teams very quickly. And not playing well on third down and just not creating turnovers. It's a tough situation for the Wolfpack. You say, how do you fix this? Well, there's only one way to fix it. It's to go in and self-evaluate, figure out where you are at this point in time, make sure that you're practicing the right things, and you're getting back to what your players can do and what they can do well. And it's self-evaluation at this point.
For North Carolina State, they don't come back with a slouch opponent. They come back with a team out of the Mid-American Conference. We're talking about the Huskies of Northern Illinois. Dave Doran has history there, of course. That's where he used to be the head coach before he came to Raleigh over a decade ago. And Northern Illinois has already beaten Notre Dame. So they're not going to be intimidated when they roll into the Carter. And I would think just like James Madison was an important game for the North Carolina program and a test that they failed, and we'll address in our next segment right here on the fifth quarter. But North Carolina State really needs to beat Northern Illinois because that's not the game that you want to fumble, especially with your head coach, because he's going to hear it from all of his boys back in the land of Lincoln if they come home with the L.
Well, no doubt. And Northern Illinois is a good football team, but the thing is, Northern Illinois had a tough loss this past weekend also. So their goal was to be a part of the 12-team playoffs. So they're looking for another win against a Power 4 team to set them up to possibly be part of that 12-team playoff. So is it a big game for them? The answer is obviously it's a big game. So we can sell these games any way you want to. But right now, as you look across the country with non-Power 5 teams playing Power 4 teams, and I should have worded it differently than I did. It's Power 4 now with what the Pac-12 has happened. But there's so many close games that are going on now that you better be ready to play well on Saturday because there's nobody laying down for you right now at this point in time. The Wolfpack, they need to pack the stadium at the Carter. I can tell you that.
And that would be a big help. And it's also a test to see whether or not North Carolina State has a football culture or do they have an excitable culture, meaning that one that can raise up a few times a year, but can it be there for games like this? This is a culture game, and it's not something that has a lot of flash. I know it's a team from the MAC, but NC State right now at a critical point in their schedule. They have Northern Illinois this week, then Wake Forest, Syracuse before they go on the road at Cal. So this is a big part of the schedule right here where the Wolfpack needs to get something going and to get some positive momentum flowing. So if you're Dave Doran and their coaching staff at NC State, what are you doing to kind of get the mood lifted, the channel changed from Clemson to Northern Illinois and really come in with that fresh, full head of steam that you're going to need to have to take on a team like the Huskies?
Well, Mike, anytime you've had a loss like they had against the Tigers, you have to come back and you can beat them down just so much, and then all of a sudden you're on the edge of losing the player. So at this point in time, they need to decide what they can do best, and from an offensive standpoint, a defensive standpoint, and in special teams, and build on what they feel like is best to give them the best opportunity to win a game right now. Obviously, they're at the point they're at now. They don't feel good about any phase that they're operating with. They're operating with a freshman quarterback whom I thought played pretty well in the game and gives them a chance to win. So it's self-assessment at this point in time. Where are we? What do we do best? How can we go out? How can we play our best, both physically and mentally?
That's Jim Collins. I'm Mike Waddell. This is the fifth quarter on the North Carolina Sports Network. And when we come back, we're going to shift our attention from the Wolfpack to the Tar Heels. What's up with Carolina? What's the current and what's the future for Tar Heel football? We'll talk about that next right here all across the Old North State on the North Carolina Sports Network.
Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Talking Tar Heel football on the fifth quarter. Jim Collins, Mike Waddell with you on the North Carolina Sports Network. And Jim, I went to my first North Carolina home football game at Kenan Stadium in September of 1969. I've seen a lot of games. I've seen cold weather games, wet weather games, hot weather games, night games, day games. I've seen them all. But I've never witnessed what I was watching with David Glenn from the palatial David Glenn compound in North Raleigh. And what David and I were watching, it was almost like I was watching like an AI version of some really bad simulation, because that was not what you would expect to see from a Hall of Fame head coach's team in their sixth year at the University of North Carolina. But yet that is the riddle that our friend Matt Brown has to try and solve right here as his team goes down 70-50 to James Madison. I mean, just to think that James Madison, in a first-year head coach, can come into Chapel Hill and score more points than any Carolina opponent in the history of the football program, that is stunning considering some of the teams that have come through there over the last 100+ years.
Mike, I wish I had an explanation for you and for all the fans out there, and the embarrassment that staff and those players suffered on Saturday. Coach Brown stood up in front of the press and he accepted all the blame for it, which you would expect him to do. He's a Hall of Fame coach that understands that in the end, the responsibility of how that team plays falls directly on his shoulders. But I'm gonna step up and say this: that responsibility on how that team plays also falls on those players. I don't know that Coach Brown at 73 years old is capable of playing a single play against the James Madison Dukes at this point in time. So players play and coaches coach. Now, are we all responsible at some point in time? Hell yes, we're all responsible. I'm responsible for how my players play, and the players are responsible for how they prepare and how they play also. So to place all the blame on the coaching staff, and I appreciate Coach Brown doing that, but let's be honest with you now. Not a single coach played a play. They didn't bust a coverage. They didn't miss a tackle. They didn't do any of that stuff. Now maybe they fumbled the ball during the week in preparation and didn't prepare well enough, well, that's their responsibility to assess where they are at this point in time. Don't get me wrong, and I'm going to be blunt with this now. I've had my ass beat bad a couple of times. Hell, you're talking about a guy that lost the national championship game to the University of Nebraska and gave up 60-some points. So I know what it's like. I don't think I've ever given up 70 to a non championship level team, a lower level team. But at the same time, you got to give James Madison credit. Bob Chesney had his team prepared. They came in and played well, and they competed their ass off. So, it's a tough road that you got to go down at this point in time. But it's self-assessment, and let's either pull them up and get ready to go and go play the Blue Devils in Wallace Wade, or you're going to get your ass beat again. Bottom line.
I've been around North Carolina football, like I said, since 1969 as a fan. Been to a lot of things. Worked in college athletics for 28 years, played college football, worked in pro football. I think I know a little bit about football. I didn't have to spend a lot of time either last year or this year around the North Carolina football program to know that it's made up of really nice people and really good, honorable people. It's not a matter of that. It isn't working. And it's a North Carolina culture problem when it comes around the football program. It doesn't mean that there are bad people running it, or there have been, but it just doesn't have that air, that essence that they're going to be successful. They don't walk around with confidence. They walk around sometimes, maybe, dare I say, cocky, when you really haven't done anything. And the thing that blew my mind, you're getting blitzed, brother, out there on the field in the first half, embarrassed, and you make a tackle and you're jumping around celebrating.
I think the big thing is, in my mind at this point in time, what is the football culture in the state of North Carolina? Where are we right now?
Right.
With the changing climate, and maybe this is not the platform to have this discussion at this point in time, but it's extremely disappointing for me, for those players at the University of North Carolina and those coaches at the University of North Carolina. I don't give a darn who the opponent is. If you're not dedicated enough to pack Kenan Stadium and support that program, then what do you expect from them? That place should be full every single Saturday that they play a home game. Now, we talk about all the time that they've sold all the season tickets. Well, guess what? Show your ass up and support them. I just think it's a cultural thing that we're in right now.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I mean, the bane of my existence for the majority of my time working on campuses in college athletics was to try to put people's butts in the seats, trying to paint an interesting story out there with our different media elements and the like to build that brand forward. And right now for North Carolina, the football culture isn't there. I don't think, we talked about it a little bit last week, but I mean, just to be blunt about it, I mean, East Carolina, NC State, Appalachian State, those three schools have a football culture. North Carolina will never have a football culture. They're just not going to have it. It's too, I hate to say, it's cliche to say wine and cheese, but it's just not. Football doesn't mean that much here. It's a basketball state, and that's too bad. It doesn't mean that you don't have great football in this state, but it's really tough. And the great football players in this state are often leaving the state and going to play somewhere else. And I mean, you recruited in the state for a few different schools. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you have a chance to go to Tennessee, Alabama, UCLA, Ohio State, or NC State, or North Carolina, or Duke, or Wake, or Charlotte, or Appalachian State or East Carolina, you're not going to select those NC State schools more times than not. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong at all, Mike. But is that a coaching staff football program problem? Or is that an administrative problem? And again, this may be a discussion for another time, but at some point, from an administration standpoint and from a fan standpoint, it costs a hell of a lot of money to be competitive at this level. So So if you're not going to give your support and you're not going to spend the money that it takes to be good, don't get me wrong, I'm not excusing losing to James Madison and giving up 70 points at that point in time. I'm not giving any excuse for that at all. But at some point in time, you've either got to make up your mind that you're going to compete at the highest level, or you're going to drop down and you're going to play at a lower level and say, we're not ready to compete at the highest level of football. And so that's a decision they've got to make administratively, in my humble opinion. And they're not the only ones in this state that have to make that decision.
Well, that's a great point because, I mean, we're talking, of course, about conference realignment, and does North Carolina stay in an ACC that's either revamped or reorganized? Do they move to the Big Ten or the SEC? Same for NC State. How are these two schools approaching realignment? And what's their commitment going to be to play football at that highest level? To your point, Jim, that's a $20 to $25 million annual investment to have a competitive payroll. If you're not doing that, you're just a middle of the road also, Randy. You're hoping to get that automatic bid by winning your way in, but you're not going to get the at-large bid. And it's a lot of money to throw out there. And I don't know a single director of athletics that I've talked to the last 3 months that feels like anything that they're doing right now is remotely sustainable. So at some point, you're going to have to make some tough choices. I think one of the interesting choices that somebody will make down the road is, instead of paying a head coach $10 million a year, going out and getting a really good, true general manager of your football program, hiring the best coaches around those, and putting the money back on the field and spreading it around. Somebody will do that, because the role of head coach today in North Carolina could well be staring down a coaching search at some point. What are they looking for? The classic head coach? Like a Butch Davis or a Mac Brown or a Larry Fedora? Are you going? Because, I mean, that's your classic head coach. The head coach has the coordinators. Everybody reports to them. The head coach is the alpha and the omega. They are the supreme ruler of the universe. I mean, my question is, what does a head coach really do in this new model that they didn't do or needed to be doing prior? I don't think it's the same job it was 4 years ago. I think it's a completely different job. And if North Carolina is indeed about to rebuild, I think this would be a hell of an opportunity to do that and maybe get a jump on whatever that new structure would be. Or, Jim Collins, veteran of over 40 years in the coaching business, would you stay the course and go after the model that has been in place for time immemorial?
Well, Mike, we've talked about this on this show before, and until the NCAA model changes, then you really have no control over what your salary cap is for your team, because your monies are coming from name, image, and likeness. Now, can you help build the name, image, and likeness? Obviously, you hire people and you can do that. But the university itself is actually not paying a player at this point in time. Now, if we ever settle these antitrust suits, then there's a good possibility that they are going to be able to pay players. And are they willing to pony up 2022 and on up to, at the end of the contract, up to $34 million to pay their roster? Now, Mike, I'm going to ask you as a former administrator in college football and in college athletics in general, explain to our fans that some of them may not understand that this being a so-called basketball state, explain to our fans what program actually earns the money to sustain all of the sports that the University of North Carolina State, Duke, all of them, all these universities have. Who sustains it all, Mike?
Football does. I mean, it's not even close. And, no sport in these athletics departments are truly making money. Your football might come close to breaking somewhere close to even.
Well, there's no doubt. It costs so much money for the App States, the East Carolinas, the Charlottes, to just maintain the roster. The team North Carolina just played James Madison. when Signetti took the Indiana job, he signed and took 15 players off the James Madison team to the University of Indiana. And by the way, they're playing pretty damn well up there right now.
Undefeated.
So to maintain your roster there, at some point in time, we're going to have to merge and get name, image, and likeness and transfer portal on the same page. And there's got to be a contract system out there at some point in time. We're basically pro football as it is right now. Let's treat it like football, and let's put them on. Let's put them on a contract because at some point in time, it's not maintainable.
Are we watching the end of days with North Carolina football under Matt Brown?
Well, I think it's a strain on the program, and I think it's a strain on Coach Brown. I'm not in that locker room. I'm not in that meeting room. So for me to say that would just be total speculation at this point in time. But I do know this because I spent a short amount of time in that building. Coach Brown is a meticulous, prideful guy. He studies video. He is so meticulous at everything he does. And to say that this situation that they're in at this point in time is troubling to him would be an understatement. But I was not in that locker room on Saturday. I was not in the meeting room today. I was not in the meeting room with the players. So for me to speculate where they are right now would be totally unfair to the University of North Carolina and totally unfair to Coach Brown and that coaching staff.
And that's fine. But you have been in the locker room at some point during your career with a team that just got their ass kicked. And you have to stand in front of them and make a little bit of sense towards that.
Sure.
And my question right now is, there wasn't a part of that football team that played well. And you can throw out Criswell's big stat line. Well, big deal. He had to throw it like that. And, Hampton getting over 150 yards. I mean, you had a lot of time to get something going, but I don't take little pearls out of that anymore. And I don't think anybody else does either. But
well, they don't, Mike. Yeah, they don't, Mike. And excuse me for interrupting, but at the same time, and I love that. I love having this discussion right now.
Right.
Because the average fan out there has no idea what Mac Brown and that coaching staff and those players are going through today. They have no idea. Right. You take a fan out there that can put on his X or his Facebook page that they all need to be fired and that they're the worst coaches in the world. Well, what the hell do you know? Have you ever been in that arena? Have you ever felt that pressure? Have you ever made those decisions and prepared those people to play? The answer is not no, but hell no. So, what they need is your support at this point in time. You're not going to make the decision on who they hire and fire anyway. So you might as well support them. And most of you have not played, and I'm talking about men only right now. Most of you have not played past the high school level and have never coached a day in your life. So, truly, what do you know? Do you know the difference between cover 2 and cover 3 and man-to-man and a blitz? Or what do you really know about the game? I would be willing to bet that I could dazzle you with some BS right now that you wouldn't understand.
You know that this is just tearing people up, but I also know when you get into these spirals at times.
Well, there's one way and one way only to stop it. And that is to go to Durham in Wallace Wade Stadium next week and play your ass off and play well and look like the team that these guys have coached you to be and that the players that you're capable of being. So that's their challenge this week. They're faced with adversity. And let's face it, Mike, we all face adversity in our life, and how you're going to line up and how you're going to accept that adversity is what makes and presents who we truly are. So it's test time. They're facing a true test this week. and let's find out. Let's find out if they're going to rise up and they're going to meet that test. I don't have the inside information about what's going on administratively and all that stuff that goes with all that. All I'm talking about is a football team that got embarrassed, a coaching staff that got embarrassed, a fan base that got embarrassed. And how are you going to react? That's your challenge right now, to rise up and react and become the team that everybody thinks, especially everybody in that building, thinks you can be. And they will accept the challenge or they won't. One of the two.
That's Jim Collins. I'm Mike Waddell. On the other side of this timeout here on the North Carolina Sports Network, we're going to talk with Eric Lusk of the North Carolina Football News.com. We'll look inside the Fabulous 15 and who are the schools that are in this wake of opportunity in North Carolina college football. And we'll find out next with Eric Lusk right here on the Fifth Quarter.
The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by three actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up.
The Fifth Quarter rolls on here on the North Carolina Sports Network. I'm Mike Waddell. He's Jim Collins. And joining us there on the right-hand side of your screen, the editor-in-chief, the grand poobah of North Carolina Football News.com, Eric Lusk. And Eric, what a great year of college football we're having right here in the state of North Carolina. I guess the theme for this genre, horror movies, because that was an ugly weekend of college football in the Old North State.
Yeah, that was it was brutal. Yeah. Had some family over at noon. We had Carolina on one TV. We had State on the other TV. And by about 1 o'clock, it's like, hey, what's for lunch? Let's just move on to some different things. It was rough. I mean, I think out of our 30 teams that played this weekend, and they were based in North Carolina, 18 of them lost. And Duke was our lone FBS team. Central and A&T, somebody had to win that one. And Gardner-Webb is our only other Division I. Yes, sir, I see that. They put on a show. They put up some points. So, but it was overall, that would be the theme of this week, was just, rough. That was, it hurt after the day. You had to go sleep that one off, definitely.
Well, I definitely want to say thank you to the staff at North Carolina Central University. They had David Glenn, Claire Pickard, Ben Boyd, and the rest of our Old North State tailgate staff out to O'Kelly Riddick Stadium. Sellout crowd, over 20,000 people in the infield, gentlemen. This was a great Aggie Eagle Classic setting. And just like a year ago in Greensboro, it was all Eagles on the field. This one, when you're putting up 60 points or more against a rival, Jim Collins, you know that you've delivered a blow to somebody's self-esteem that you're going to enjoy bragging on them for the next 364 days.
Well, that really hurts my pride, since I'm a Greensboro, North Carolina native, and I have a master's degree from North Carolina A&T State University. So this really hurts my pride and affects. I may have to evaluate how much money I'm giving to the Aggies these days.
I was at Campbell, and I'm getting the messages, hey, A&T's returned the opening kickoff back 100 yards, longest play of the year. I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a game. And then as I checked back in, it was all Eagles. So they, I think someone had the headline Route 66. It was that kind of day for the Eagles. So they're it's a fun program to keep up with, because they're making some national waves as well. So we may see them in the rankings eventually, national rankings, next few weeks. So,
Eric, one of the things that you said that was the case and is the case right now, it's tough to look at these results by our football subdivision teams and Division I teams altogether. But in the Division II ranks, boy,
Yes.
North Carolina D2 football could be pretty special. And again, some
Absolutely.
teams starting to gain some midseason momentum, specifically out of the South Atlantic Conference.
Yeah, definitely. Lenore Ryan, they moved up to number 6 in the national rankings this week. One of the polls, they were 12. They took their first conference game, took care of business, moved to 3-0. Good sign, because when there was a new coaching change, there was a lot of talk. I think they turned the roster over a little bit. And, anytime you have a coaching change, you're going to have some of that, adjustment period. But they've hit the ground running. They were predicted to win the conference. I predicted Wingate to win the conference just because I thought there was a little bit more experience back. The coach, he was new, but he's not new to the program. But Wingate took a loss this weekend. They took a loss on the road to Carson Newman. So right now, Lenore Ryan's in the driver's seat, but you've got both of those teams, and they'll go to the wire. I think they meet in November, and I'm thinking by the time we get there, those two teams will still be solid. And, teams like Catawba, they're trying to climb up there. They suffered a loss, kind of fit the weekend. But, yeah, definitely. D2 football is kind of giving us the shining lights these past few weeks, definitely.
And Jimmy, when you look back over your career and even back to when you were a boy coming up out of that Guilford County area, small college football in North Carolina has a great tradition.
Mhm.
And I know, Elon, your alma mater, back in the college division days of NAI, brought home that national championship back in the 80s.
By 80 and 81, they won back-to-back national championships with Jerry Tolley as the head coach. And Coach Tolley was my secondary coach when I was at Elon, played for Red Wilson. And obviously my schools had a tough weekend. The Aggies and the Phoenix go down to East Tennessee State University. So it was a tough weekend for my guys. And I think the other interesting conversation, Eric, is that the Western Carolina University Catamounts played so well in Carter Stadium. And now they've fallen on some tough times against some pretty good opponents. They lost to Campbell, and now they go to Montana and give up 46 points at Montana. So obviously, whoever scheduled that game needs their head examined anyway. So, but I find it interesting that the Catamounts are in a struggle at this point in time.
Yeah, I think they're better than their 1-3 record would suggest. Seeing Campbell live this week, I was a little curious, like how did Campbell beat them? Because Campbell struggled. They couldn't stop the run. Stony Brook converted like 12 third downs. It was just like they just kind of held on to the ball. So I was a little surprised. I think maybe Western's encouraged that they were able to score. Montana came into the season ranked top 5 in the FCS. I think they've dropped to about 10th. So I don't know. I don't know if you come out of that encouraged, hey, we gave the number 10 team a run, or do you come out like, oh man, we've lost 3 games now? I don't know, but they've still got their whole conference schedule ahead of them. That's going to be tough though. There's some tough teams. East Tennessee might be better than we think. Coached by Trey Lamb, who was in our state last year at Gardner-Webb. Mercer, Lenore Ryan's coach, Mike Jacobs, is now at Mercer. They're 4-0 right now. So I think they've got a tough road ahead of them, but I wouldn't count them out yet. They've still got a solid lineup. So.
Well, the interesting thing is, excuse me for interrupting, but the interesting thing is the head coach at Western Carolina, Kerwin Bell, and the defensive coordinator, Jerry Odom, are people that I have a background with from the University of Florida. Jerry Odom is a hell of a football coach, a good defensive coordinator, and knows what he's doing. So I get concerned when they struggle, because I know Jerry knows how to coach defense, and I know he understands how to stop people. So that's a little bit concerning for me as they move into conference play. But it's going to be interesting as we move through and start playing in the various conferences within the state.
Yeah, definitely.
We're talking with Eric Lusk here from the North Carolina footballnews.com, Jim Collins, myself, Mike Waddell here on the North Carolina Sports Network. I want to ask you guys, because you're North Carolina natives, let's talk about football culture in North Carolina. Jim and I addressed it, Eric, earlier in today's show, talking about the great football environments in North Carolina. The question I want to ask the two of you now is it logical to think that at any point in the next 20 years that the administrations in North Carolina or NC State would invest at such a level to make football a truly competitive sport with which they have the same focus as they do men's basketball?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think part of it is you see Cincinnati has a run and they make it to the Final Four. TCU has a run. And so naturally you're, as a State or Carolina fan, you're like, why can't we do that? But I think, and I heard Coach say this earlier, and both of you said it, winning is hard. It is hard to win games. I mean, we have 30 teams in our state, or 34 teams, and only 4 of them are still undefeated after 4 weeks. So, yeah, it's a tough thing. I think, they would have to. It's not just money either, though. You've also got to hit on your coaches. You've got to find coaches that can evaluate talent well, that can find those diamonds in the rough. I think if a team like State of Carolina is going to make a run, all the pieces are going to have to come into place. You're going to have to just hit on everything, catch a few breaks, and, have somebody that can really evaluate talent, I think. Coach, you can probably speak to that more as far as that aspect, but it's tough. It's tough to build a winner, that I think it's easier, like I said, it's easier to have the expectation than it is to actually pull it off.
Well, let me say this, Eric. In the old days of recruiting, and I hate referring back to the old days because I date myself at this point in time, but there was a time in recruiting that you could go to Eastern North Carolina or Western North Carolina or even in the Piedmont, and you could find a player that was not being highly recruited that ended up being an outstanding player for you, whether it's North Carolina, Duke, North Carolina State. But in this day and age of recruiting, it's hard to find that diamond in the rough, is the way I would refer to it, because there's so much attention focused on the recruiting phase of it right now. But at the same time, the schools within this state, we've got to get to the point where we maintain the level of talent within the structure of this state. We can't lose them to Clemson, to South Carolina, to Tennessee, to the adjoining states. You've got to keep the majority of them home. Now, I don't sit in those meetings anymore. So for me to sit here and say, it's easy for me to say that the key is that you get out and hustle and you maintain relationships. It's high school relationships. It's relationships with moms and dads and all those things. But at the same time, in the end, it comes down to money. And are we willing to combine all those relationships and build those relationships and be able to have and avoid somebody coming in and outbidding you for a player?
Yeah, that's right.
How about that? What a discourse to get us started here for another week of college football in the Old North State. Eric Lusk, Jim Collins, and me, Mike Waddell. We are the fifth quarter here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Thanks a lot for tuning in this week. Reminder to go to our website. It's ncsportsnetwork.com. David, Glenn, and our staff. All new information pretty much every day of the week. And we're over 18,000 subscribers right now on our YouTube page. So be sure to like and subscribe at the bottom of the page. We'll see you next week talking football right here. This is the North Carolina Sports Network.